You people always think you deserve first class." The words sliced through the quiet cabin like a blade. Every head turned at once. The man in the pale blue polo, confident to the point of arrogance, stood blocking the aisle, his hand gripping the seat as if he owned the entire plane. Seated below him, Dr. Maya Carter didn't move. The light caught her cheekbone, her expression calm, unmoved, almost statuesque. She simply lifted her gaze, eyes deep brown and steady, so composed that the man's anger seemed almost childish in contrast. In that moment, the air thickened with the scent of power, wealth, and something far more insidious: prejudice. Captain Daniel Reynolds stood a few steps away, his brows furrowed. He had flown thousands of hours and prided himself on being able to tell who's who at a glance. The woman before him, dressed in a plain suit, no jewelry, no display of status, to him, she looked out of place. "Ma'am," he said stiffly, "this seat belongs to Mr. Grant. Please move before we have to call security." The cabin fell silent. Young flight attendant Jenna Lee, standing nearby, felt her heart pound. Her eyes flicked to the ticket on the tray table. The print was clear. 2A, Dr. Maya Carter. She knew the truth, but her throat locked. Maya slowly looked up. Her voice was calm, each word falling with the weight of quiet authority. "Check the manifest." A ripple of whispers moved through the cabin. Thomas Grant laughed, the laugh of a man who had never been questioned. "We don't need to check," he said. "I can tell just by looking." The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop. Maya didn't flinch, didn't argue, only met his eyes. The calm in her gaze made a few passengers look down, ashamed of their own silence. Captain Reynolds exhaled sharply, ready to end this standoff. "You're holding up the flight, ma'am." Maya leaned back slightly, her tone soft but sharp enough to stop him mid-sentence. "No, Captain, you are." The air froze. A few phones began recording. No one knew who this woman was, but everyone felt it. A quiet battle between arrogance and dignity was unfolding before them. Reynolds adjusted his cap and stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "I'll have to ask you to." She cut him off, her eyes fixed on the ticket still lying on the tray. "Ask me because of protocol or because of my skin color." No one spoke. The light from the overhead panel reflected off her face like a stage spotlight, and in that instant, everyone realized they were witnessing something much larger than a flight delay. A truth was about to take flight, and none of them yet knew that the woman they had just tried to diminish was the one who held the power to decide the fate of the skies themselves. The steady hum of the engines pulsed beneath the floor like the heartbeat of an aircraft not yet ready to take flight. But inside the first-class cabin, every breath was drawn tight as a wire. Captain Daniel Reynolds turned to the young flight attendant. "Jenna, verify the manifest," he ordered. His voice was dry, not from fatigue, but from fear of being wrong. Jenna bent over the small control screen, her hand trembling slightly. The text glowed clear. "Seat 2A, Dr. Maya Carter." She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper, heard only by those nearby. "Sir, the seat really does belong to Dr. Carter." Reynolds frowned. "System error. Call ground. Reconfirm." Those two words, System error slipped out effortlessly, a familiar escape route for every hidden bias. From the front row, Thomas Grant let out a laugh, sharp and arrogant. "They're always good at excuses," he sneered. "There's always some error that turns everything into drama." A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. One middle-aged man murmured, "That's enough." But no one stood up. No one wanted to be the first. Maya sat still, her hand resting lightly on the armrest, her finger tapping a slow rhythm. In her mind, memories flickered. The times she was mistaken for a staff member at conferences, the suspicious looks when she entered boardrooms as doctor. All of it condensed into this moment, thick with power and cowardice. She looked straight at Reynolds, her voice calm and cold. "You don't need to fix the system. You need to fix your perception." A shiver rippled through a few passengers. There was something in her tone, not anger, but the authority of someone who had been disrespected too many times to still fear it. Thomas leaned forward, gripping the seat, trying to reclaim dominance. "Look, I don't care who you are. This seat is mine. I paid for it." Maya tilted her head slightly, a faint smile forming. "And I've been paying for your silence for years. Trust me, you're still in debt." Reynolds cut in, his voice rising. "You're delaying the schedule, ma'am. If you don't move, I'll have to call security." The air grew thick. Someone muttered, "She should just move." But the words vanished into the charged silence. Maya took a slow breath, closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, sharp, steady, unyielding. "Call them," she said, "and make sure they record everything." Reynolds froze. In her eyes, he saw no fear, only the certainty of someone who held a power he hadn't yet recognized. Across the cabin, a phone screen lit up. Its reflection danced across his bronze nameplate, turning the cabin into a courtroom. Maya folded her hands, her voice low but cutting clear through the tension. "Every time you call bias a system error, you're rewriting injustice into the code, and I'm here to shut it down." For a moment, even the engines seemed to stop. The entire cabin held its breath. No one knew that within minutes this so-called system error would bring the entire airline to a halt. The silence in the first-class cabin stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Everyone waited, watching to see if the woman would finally stand, or if the entire flight would be delayed over one seat. But Dr. Maya Carter didn't move. Calm, upright. Her eyes fixed forward as if the whole world were testing her resolve, and she had no intention of losing. Captain Daniel Reynolds frowned, his hand gripping the radio. "Ma'am, I'm trying to help you save face here," he said quietly, his tone sharp as a blade. "If you don't cooperate, I'll—" "Make the same mistake again," Maya interrupted, her voice soft yet edged with steel. "You're calling the act of humiliating a passenger helping. How strange. Arrogance always mistakes itself for kindness." A faint click echoed. From a few rows back, another phone lit up. More passengers began recording, silent witnesses capturing every breath, every word. Small, trembling lenses, but powerful enough to become evidence. Thomas Grant leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, still wearing that smug grin. "You're making a fool of yourself, you know that. Nobody cares who you are." Maya turned toward him. Her gaze was steady, not angry, not afraid, only measuring. "You're right," she said, "until they start watching." The reply hit like a tremor. Reynolds glanced around, realizing at least 3 passengers were now filming. He took a step back, trying to regain his authoritative tone. "Dr. Carter, I'll repeat myself. If you don't move, I'll have you escorted off this aircraft." Maya looked down at the ticket still resting on the tray table. The words Dr. Maya Carter, 2A, glimmered beneath the soft yellow light. She placed a fingertip on it, as if touching living proof. "Escort me out," she said slowly. "Because he's richer, or because I don't look like him?" There was no answer, only the heavy shame that filled the air. Jenna Lee, the young flight attendant near the cockpit, looked from Maya to the captain. Her lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but hesitation won. Inside her, duty wrestled with conscience. "Captain," she whispered, "maybe I can verify the manifest again from the central system." Reynolds raised a hand sharply. "No need. I said it's a system error. I'll take responsibility." Maya leaned back slightly, her voice thin as wire, cutting clean through the silence. "No, Captain. You're not taking responsibility. You're just afraid." The cabin froze. For the first time, Reynolds's eyes flickered. And in that instant, the balance of power shifted. He was no longer the one in control, but the one being judged before an audience. Thomas laughed, trying to mask his discomfort. "Oh, please, you're wasting everyone's time." "No," Maya said, her tone firm as a locking latch. "I'm reminding you that time isn't worth more than dignity." Her last words reverberated through the cabin like a verdict. Somewhere deep in everyone's mind, something shifted. An understanding that some flights only take off once the truth is cleared for departure. And none of them yet knew that within minutes the captain's radio would call out the name of the very woman they had just dismissed, the woman who held the power to ground their entire airline. The radio on the control panel suddenly crackled to life, filling the cabin with the familiar hiss of static. Every eye turned toward Captain Daniel Reynolds, who was trying to keep his composure, though the veins on his hand bulged from the force of his grip. "Flight 721, this is Ether Airways Operations," the voice came through, steady and official. "Confirming passenger manifest. The passenger in seat 2A is Dr. Maya Carter." The cabin fell silent. That name hung in the air, each syllable landing like the strike of a gavel in a courtroom. Jenna Lee exhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. Reynolds froze, his eyes darting toward Maya, who remained seated, perfectly still, without a trace of triumph. There was only calm, deep and deliberate, as if she had known this moment would come. "You," Reynolds stammered, his voice hoarse. "You're Dr. Carter of Ether Airways." Maya tilted her head slightly, her reply so simple it cut sharper than any accusation. "Not just of this airline. I'm the founder." The air in the cabin seemed to change color. Thomas Grant, the man who had mocked her moments ago, went rigid. His smirk vanished, wiped clean from his face as though someone had just slapped the arrogance out of him. "That's impossible," he muttered. "There's no way you can sit in the same class as you," Maya interrupted, her tone quiet but unyielding. "That's exactly the problem. You people never think we can." Reynolds tried to steady himself, lifting the radio as if to regain control, but the voice from headquarters came through first. "Captain Reynolds, we are monitoring the situation through the cabin feed. Be advised that Dr. Carter is the CEO, founder, and board member of Ether Airways. You are to proceed with full protocol and await further instruction." Each word landed with the weight of final authority. The passengers who had stayed silent now lowered their heads. A few discreetly turned off their cameras, but it was too late. The truth had already been recorded. Maya drew in a slow breath. Her voice wasn't loud, but carried a gravity that filled every corner of the cabin. "This is why I stayed seated. Not to prove I was right, but to show where the system was wrong." Jenna stepped forward, her eyes glistening with guilt. "Dr. Carter, I saw your name on the screen. I knew, but I was afraid I'd lose my job." Maya gave a soft nod. "Don't be afraid to speak the truth, Jenna. It's the only job you can't be fired from for doing right." Reynolds bowed his head. All the authority of a seasoned captain now felt like a burden pressing down on him. "Dr. Carter, She raised a hand to stop him. "No apologies, just accountability. That's what you've always asked of others." The cabin sank into stillness. The hum of the engines now sounded like the heartbeat of those realizing they had misjudged who held the real power. A passenger in row 3 whispered, voice trembling, "She's the founder of this airline." Thomas shut his eyes and clenched his jaw. Reynolds placed the radio back down, speaking slowly. "Operations confirming. Dr. Carter is on board. We're awaiting next instructions." The voice from headquarters returned, cold and precise. "Flight 721 is temporarily grounded. All cabin data will be preserved for investigation. Command authority is hereby transferred to Dr. Carter until further notice." Reynolds froze. Jenna exhaled. Thomas lowered his head. Maya didn't smile, didn't speak. She only looked forward. Outside, the runway lights flickered faintly through the morning mist, but inside another kind of light had risen. Not from the control panel, but from the truth itself, shining straight into every face that had just relearned the true meaning of respect. The cabin remained utterly still. The radio had gone silent, yet its echo lingered in the air, heavy as metal. Captain Daniel Reynolds stood tall, his posture rigid, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. The authority he once believed to be absolute was slipping through his fingers. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't know." Maya looked at him, her gaze calm yet sorrowful. "Not knowing," she replied softly, "has never excused disrespect." Her words were quiet, but they struck like a verdict. Thomas Grant sat frozen, trying to recover his old smirk. "So you're actually the owner of this airline?" Maya turned toward him, her gaze cold enough to freeze the arrogance in his chest. "No, Mr. Grant, I don't own it. I built it. And because of that, I can't let anyone turn the sky into a place of division." He gave a shaky laugh. "You're turning a small issue into politics." "No," Maya replied. "I'm turning silence into a lesson." Reynolds took a deep breath. "We need to depart," he said. "Over 100 passengers have connecting flights. I'm under pressure from—" Maya interrupted, her tone low but resolute. "You let this plane take off with bias long before I boarded it. The problem isn't pressure, Captain. It's priorities." The cabin went still again. Jenna Lee stood near the cockpit door, her hands clenched tightly, her voice trembling but clear. "Captain, operations is transmitting. They're requesting a status report for the delay and confirmation of Dr. Carter's command authority." Reynolds turned toward her, silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Confirmed." It was the first time in his career that he bowed his head, not to a superior, but to someone who was right. The radio crackled once more, and the voice from headquarters came through, firm and controlled. "Flight 721, hold position. The entire cabin is being recorded. Await further instruction from the executive chair." Jenna turned to Maya, her voice filled with awe. You just made the entire system stop." Maya smiled faintly, her eyes drifting toward the window, where the morning light spilled across the wing. "Not me," she said softly. "The truth." Thomas exhaled, his tone sharp with bitterness. "You think one seat can change the world?" Maya turned back to him, her reply gentle, but cutting through the silence like wind through glass. "No, but sometimes one seat is enough to remind the world who deserves to sit." Outside, security vehicles appeared along the runway, their lights flickering through the mist. Inside, every passenger began to realize they had become witnesses to a moment that would be retold for years to come. Reynolds lowered the radio, his voice quiet, almost to himself. "The sky has never been this silent." Maya looked up, her tone soft as a breeze, yet clear enough for everyone to hear. "No, Captain. The sky isn't silent. It's listening." And in that instant, every old voice of authority fell quiet as the truth finally began to take flight. A low beep echoed from the control panel, followed by the steady blink of a small red light on the cabin wall. Everyone looked up. Captain Reynolds frowned. "What's happening?" Jenna Lee stared at the auxiliary screen by the cockpit door, her eyes widening. "Sir, the system just switched to internal audit mode, recording mode." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Good," she said, her tone calm, as if she had merely flipped a light switch. "Now we have transparency." Reynolds took half a step back. "What did you do?" "I named it," Maya replied. "Protocol 9. A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers glanced at each other, unsure of what was happening, only noticing the flashing lights that made the space feel like the opening of a trial. The reflection from the metal panels cast a cold glow across the room. "Protocol 9, Jenna repeated under her breath, "is full data capture mode. It's only used during investigations of major violations." Reynolds gripped the radio tightly. "Turn it off." "You can't," Maya said softly, but with finality. "Once it's activated, control transfers to headquarters. Every action you take from this moment, your voice, your orders, your movements, is being recorded." The air thickened, so heavy that everyone could hear the sound of their own heartbeat. A passenger whispered from the back, "Can she really do that?" "She wrote that protocol," Jenna said, her voice trembling. "Dr. Carter is the architect of this airline's security system." Reynolds froze. That sentence shattered what little authority he had left to hold on to. Thomas Grant looked around, laughing nervously. "You've got to be kidding me. She just triggered an internal investigation on her own flight." Maya turned to him, her voice low and sharp as tempered steel. "Not mine. Everyone's. That's why it exists, so no one, regardless of their rank, can hide behind the word procedure to justify disrespect. The radio came alive again, the voice from Ether Command cutting through the tension like ice. Flight 721, this is Ether Command. The cabin is now under live surveillance. Captain Reynolds, hold position. You are not authorized for departure. A wave of reaction swept through the passengers. Some gasped. Others exchanged looks of shock and shame. They all understood they were witnessing something far greater than a flight delay. Reynolds placed the radio down, his voice rough and low. You're paralyzing an entire airline. Maya met his gaze, calm and unwavering. No, I'm healing it. Jenna stepped closer, her voice trembling but firm. Dr. Carter, Operations is requesting a direct statement from you. Maya nodded slightly. Patch it through. The faint static of the radio filled the cabin before a clear, steady female voice came through. Dr. Carter, this is Command. Protocol confirmed. We are initiating a full freeze on Flight 721 pending investigation. Reynolds closed his eyes, inhaled sharply, then looked directly at Maya. What do you want from us? Maya's reply was quiet, but it carried through every corner of the plane. Only 3 things: admission, accountability, and silence, while justice does the rest. The cabin sank into stillness. Only the rhythmic blink of the warning light remained, pulsing like the heartbeat of a truth newly awakened. No one realized it yet, but at that moment the flight had stopped being a means of travel. It had become a courtroom in the sky, where authority lost its voice and dignity began to speak. The cabin lights shifted to a soft amber hue, warm yet tense. The hum of the engines faded, then stopped entirely. The aircraft no longer moved. It stood still on the runway, as if even the sky itself was holding its breath, waiting for a verdict. Captain Reynolds turned the brim of his pilot's cap in his hands, the lines on his face tightening. The silence pressed heavier on him than any cockpit pressure ever could. Dr. Carter, he said quietly, if you want to file a report, we can do that after the flight. But right now, we need to take off. Maya looked up, her voice gentle but sharp as a blade. You think taking off in silence is a solution? It's exactly because everyone keeps saying after the flight that things like this never stop happening. Thomas Grant slammed his hand against the tray table, his frustration cracking through the air. For God's sake, it's just a seat. We can't stop the whole world over a ticket. Maya turned her head toward him, her gaze steady and cold enough to still his voice. We're not stopping the world because of a seat. We're stopping it because of the way you decided someone didn't deserve that seat. The cabin fell into a profound silence. Those who had looked away before now began to raise their heads. A middle-aged man in row 3 spoke up, his voice firm. She's right. A woman whispered, no one should be treated like that. Jenna Lee clutched her tablet, her hands trembling as a new alert flashed across the screen. Ground control confirms flight hold for investigation. Compliance team en route. She drew in a shaky breath before speaking, her voice trembling but clear. Captain, they've issued a full stop order. No one is to leave the aircraft until the report is complete. Reynolds looked at Maya, his expression a mix of fear and exhaustion. What more do you want? You've already won. Maya shook her head. I don't want to win. I want you to see. She unlocked her phone and tapped a small icon. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, followed by the calm, automated voice of the system. Protocol 9 verified. Cabin communications under compliance monitoring. Thomas glanced around, his composure unraveling. What the hell is going on now? Jenna whispered, almost in disbelief. She just activated full corporate-level surveillance. Every word, every sound in this cabin is now being recorded. Maya looked up, her tone calm but commanding. If the system can protect the company's assets, it can protect the company's people. Her eyes swept through the cabin, steady and unyielding. Every time you say, "It's just a seat," you forget who those seats exist for. The engineers, the crew, the passengers, the very people you choose to overlook. Reynolds exhaled sharply, lowering his radio. Dr. Carter, do you have any idea what the consequences of this will be? I do, Maya replied, her voice composed and resolute. That's why I'm doing it. Outside, the runway lights blinked in rhythmic succession. Inside, the small lights above the seats reflected across every face. They were no longer just passengers. They were witnesses. The radio crackled again, a firm, unwavering voice breaking the silence. Flight 7221, hold position. Repeat, hold position. Inspection team en route. Reynolds nodded faintly, lips pressed together. Thomas leaned back in his seat, and for the first time during the entire flight, he had nothing left to say. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. A memory flickered. Being 16, asked to leave a classroom because she didn't look like she belonged in an advanced program. Back then she had walked out, but today she would not stand up. Outside, the amber light brushed along the aircraft's frame. Inside, the entire sky was learning how to be still, to listen to a woman speak. The air in the cabin hung heavy as lead. Every second stretched endlessly. Flight 7221, which should have left the ground 17 minutes ago, had become a courtroom suspended between the sky and justice. Light glinted off Captain Daniel Reynolds's uniform as he caught his own reflection in the cockpit glass. A man who once believed authority was the only voice worth hearing, now standing inside a silence of his own making. Dr. Carter, he said quietly, his voice weighed down by shame. I've been with this airline for 28 years. I've never been challenged like this. I'm not a bad man. Maya looked up, her gaze steady but not cold. No one starts as a bad person, Captain. We only become one when we stay silent for too long and start calling it duty. Jenna Lee, standing nearby, felt a shiver race down her spine. She remembered the moment she saw Dr. Maya Carter's name on the manifest and chose silence anyway. Now she could feel the weight of that fear, the same fear that kept an entire system trapped in the cycle of injustice. The radio crackled to life, the sharp, commanding voice of Ether Command cutting through the cabin. Captain Reynolds, Flight 721 is under emergency review. Full cooperation with Dr. Carter is required until the compliance team arrives. Reynolds lowered his head, his voice trembling. Understood. Thomas Grant, the man who started it all, tilted his chin toward Maya, clinging to the last shred of arrogance in him. So what now? You want a public apology? A viral video to make you a hero? Maya leaned toward him, her tone low and deliberate, each word etched into the air. I don't need to be seen as a hero. I need you to stop thinking humiliation is a small thing." A few passengers nodded. A silver-haired woman in row 4 whispered, "She's saying what we all know, but never dared to admit." Maya looked around the cabin. "You see," she said slowly, "silence is never neutral. It always takes the side of power." Jenna gripped her tablet tightly, then gathered her courage and stepped forward. "Dr. Takata, I need to say something," she said, her voice shaking. "I saw your name on the manifest, but I didn't speak up. I was afraid of losing my job. I was wrong." Maya's expression softened. "It's all right, Jenna. You're not the first to be afraid. But be the first to stop being silent." In that moment, the radio lit up again. "Ether Command confirms. Compliance team en route. Dr. Carter, maintain cabin authority." Reynolds stepped back slightly, his voice rough as gravel. "You have operational command, Dr. Carter." Those words, brief, yet powerful enough to shift the air itself. Thomas shot up from his seat, shouting, "You're all insane! You're blowing up a minor mistake into a disaster!" Maya looked at him, her tone calm but resonant. "A small mistake can crash a plane, Mr. Grant. And small mistakes like yours, repeated for generations, have kept millions from ever taking off." The silence returned, but it was no longer avoidance. It was awareness. Maya sat down, calmly unlocked her phone, and tapped the secured interface. A soft beep echoed. "Ether Command, this is Carter. Initiate full scale report protocol. The entire cabin is now under audit." The cabin lights shifted to red. A mechanical voice followed. "Compliance audit in progress. Data log secured." Jenna drew in a sharp breath, her eyes wide with awe. "You just triggered a live corporate audit mid-flight." Maya smiled faintly. "No, I just turned the lights on." Outside the window, the morning sun rose higher, bathing the motionless aircraft in gold. Inside, every person, from the captain to the passengers, understood that from this moment on, the flight no longer belonged to the schedule. It belonged to history. The intercom crackled to life, its tone deep and steady. "Flight 721, this is Ether Command. The compliance team is approaching. Maintain the scene. The entire cabin is now under legal observation." No one spoke. No one pretended to be busy anymore. The flight, designed for comfort, had become a courtroom in the sky, where every glance and every breath was a statement. Dr. Maya Carter sat still in seat 2A, her hand resting lightly on her boarding pass, a silent emblem. She wasn't looking at anyone, yet everyone was looking at her. Even Captain Reynolds, the man who had commanded hundreds of flights, now stood at the edge of the aisle, his hands loose at his sides, his voice rough and uncertain. "Dr. Carter," he said. I'm sorry." She lifted her head, her gaze steady, not cold but unyielding. "Captain, an apology means you understand what was wrong. What I need isn't words. It's what you choose to do after them." Thomas Grant rose abruptly, desperate to reclaim whatever authority he had left. "So what do you want then? You're tearing down your own airline." Maya turned toward him, her voice low, measured, and sharp enough to cut through arrogance. "I'm not tearing it down, Thomas. I'm teaching it how to exist without stepping on others." The cabin fell completely silent. Jenna Lee looked at Maya, her eyes full of admiration mixed with regret. She murmured softly, almost to herself, "I used to think silence was safe." Maya turned to her, her voice gentle but piercing. "Silence is never safe, Jenna. It's only safe for the wrong sul." Reynolds lowered his head, then spoke slowly. "Dr. Takata, Ether Command is requesting a live statement from you. They want to hear the full account directly." Maya nodded. "Patch it through?" Jenna tapped the control panel, and the faint static of the radio filled the air before a strong, authoritative female voice came through. "Dr. Takata, this is Elena Morales, Chief Compliance Officer of Ether Airways. The system is recording. Please begin." The entire cabin held its breath. Maya spoke calmly, her tone even and steady, but carrying the weight of a lifetime of judgment. "This morning, I boarded Flight 7221 under my real name. A passenger decided I didn't belong in the seat I paid for. A captain confirmed that prejudice by questioning my identity instead of checking the facts. I don't need an apology. I need change." She paused, her eyes meeting Reynolds. "We can't talk about flight safety when the people within the system aren't safe in their dignity." There was silence from the other end before Elena Morales spoke again, her tone slower, deliberate. "Acknowledged. The entire incident will be documented internally. Flight 7221 will serve as the first case for behavioral bias control protocol. Dr. Carter, do you have any further requests?" Maya closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "Yes, let everyone in this cabin hear what I'm about to say." Jenna switched the system to speaker mode. Maya's voice filled the cabin, calm, resonant, and echoing deep into everyone's chest. "Every time we choose silence, we teach the world that injustice is a small thing. But every time someone stands up, even with just one calm sentence, the world has to stop and listen." Thomas lowered his gaze. Reynolds exhaled, his shoulders trembling slightly. Jenna wiped away tears. Outside, the morning light spread across the aircraft's wings, its reflection spilling into the cabin and illuminating every face, as if they were witnessing a different kind of takeoff. Elena Morales' voice came through the radio once more, softened now. "Dr. Takata, Ether Command confirms your request. The investigation will begin as soon as the aircraft lands, and you will lead it." Maya smiled faintly, her voice quiet, almost like a vow. "Good. It's time to teach the sky to see people in the same light." Silence settled over the cabin once more, but this time it wasn't fear, it was respect. A new chapter for Ether Airways and for justice had just been written, high above the ground, before the flight ever took off. The morning light streamed through the small cabin window, casting a soft golden hue across Dr. Maya Carter's face, as if dawn itself had chosen her as its starting point. The aircraft remained motionless on the runway, yet inside every person, something had begun to move. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his hand clutching the brim of his worn cap. He stopped before Maya, his voice hoarse and trembling with something he hadn't had to say in 28 years of flying. "Dr. Carter, I was wrong. I let judgment replace truth. I'll take full responsibility." Maya looked at him, her gaze calm, her voice soft but razor-sharp. "Don't take responsibility alone, Captain. Make the system take it with you." He nodded. It was the heaviest nod of his life, the kind that surrendered old power in exchange for something he had forgotten: humanity. Thomas Grant sat nearby, his hands clasped tightly. He stared down at the crumpled boarding pass in his grip, the same ticket he once believed gave him the right to look down on others. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, "I crossed a line." Maya didn't respond right away. Instead, she asked, "If no one had recorded it, would you still say that?" Thomas said nothing. The answer was clear. A voice came through the radio, steady and cold. "Flight 721, this is Ether Command. The compliance team has reached the jet bridge. Prepare to transfer operational authority to Dr. Carter." Jenna Lee stepped forward, holding her tablet, her voice trembling but clear. "Dr. Carter, the system is requesting your authentication code to finalize the incident report." Maya placed her finger on the screen. "Beep." The automated voice announced, "Record confirmed. Flight 721 officially grounded, pending internal review." The statement echoed like a bell. No one clapped. No one spoke. There was only the sound of quiet breathing, slow, steady, real. Maya stood up. Seat 2A, where everything began, was now empty, yet heavier than ever. She looked around the cabin, her voice even and firm. Not loud, but so clear that everyone lifted their heads. "I didn't stop this flight for revenge. I stopped it to remind you that respect should never be an optional class upgrade. It must be the default for everyone." Elena Morales' voice came through the radio, deep and resolute. "Ether Command confirms. The compliance team is now proceeding. And Dr. Carter, thank you for making us remember why this airline was built in the first place." Reynolds turned toward the cabin, speaking quietly but with weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire crew, I apologize. Today we learned the most expensive lesson in aviation. Calmness does not equal correctness, and silence does not equal justice." Maya nodded slightly, then turned to Thomas. "You once said it was just a seat," she said. "But today it's a mirror reflecting the world." And for the first time, the world finally looked back. The cabin fell silent. A few passengers placed their hands over their hearts, not out of fear, but out of emotion. Jenna wept. Reynolds bowed his head. Thomas couldn't lift his eyes. The cockpit door opened, and the cool morning air swept through, carrying the scent of jet fuel and the chill of dawn. Maya stepped forward, standing in the aisle, and spoke her final words. Soft, yet they hit every heart like a tremor. "You wanted me to move to the back, but today it's the world that needs to move forward." She turned and walked down the metal steps, leaving behind a cabin so silent that one could almost hear the heartbeat of the moment. Outside, the sunlight flared across the aircraft's body, illuminating the words, "Ether Airways," brighter than ever. Then, through the overhead speakers, a single automated voice delivered what sounded like a verdict and a promise. "Flight 721, grounded. Dignity has taken its seat." And in that moment, before the plane ever took off, human dignity finally did. Flight 7221 never left the ground that day. Yet it became the most important flight in Ether Airways history, not because of the distance it traveled, but because of how far it made people look within themselves. That day, Dr. Maya Carter didn't need to shout, didn't need to demand power. She simply sat still, calm, and let the truth speak for itself. She taught the world a lesson more powerful than any title or badge. Dignity doesn't need an upgrade, it is the default. Captain Reynolds didn't lose his career. He kept it, but this time, with eyes open and a heart humble enough to bow to what is right, Jenna Lee kept flying, carrying in her heart Maya's words. Don't be afraid to tell the truth, Jenna. It's the only job you can't be fired from, for doing right. And Thomas Grant, the man who once believed money could buy respect, became the symbol of the most expensive lesson of all. Those who pay more don't always fly higher. When the cabin footage spread across social media, millions shared it, not out of anger, but because they realized something simple yet profound. Anyone can be misjudged until they choose to stop being silent. And so Flight 7221 didn't need to take off to touch the sky. It did something greater. It brought human dignity back to where it belongs. If you believe respect is not the privilege of the powerful, but the foundation of humanity, leave a like, hit subscribe, and comment with 3 words: respect takes flight. Because every time we speak what is right, even in the smallest sentence, the world learns to fly just a little higher.